First, I want to thank the FIRST organization for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to be talking about the Center for Threat Informed Defense project CTI blueprints. Maybe. Now that I've got the right clicker, wanted to start with an introduction of myself. I've been an intelligence professional for over 15 years now. Started out with the US government as an all-source analyst. And then I moved into the private sector building intelligence products and services. And finally, I joined MITRE to help drive their strategic vision as it relates to how they process CTI, which means I get to spend a lot more time thinking about how we should be doing things and less time doing them now. But I still get to do fun projects like this on occasion. So what is CTI Blueprints? It is our attempt to chip away at raising the floor for intelligence production across CTI teams globally. One of the big problems that we are trying to help fix is really the fact that CTI is still a young field, and you have a lot of disparate ways in which production is done across teams, across companies, across countries. And so what we're really attempting to help drive towards is raising that floor and help build some standardization into how we as a community can produce towards those intelligence requirements that we talked so much about yesterday, as well as how we can tailor to specific consumers. And so we're really focusing on the production and audience portions of the intelligence cycle. I feel like no CTI presentation is complete without showing the intelligence cycle, so bear with me as we go through a couple of slides here. The way CTI Blueprint supports the production side, so the bottom kind of 3/5 of that production cycle, that intelligence cycle, isn't telling you how to produce or telling you what the best practices are for analysis, standard analytic techniques, all the things that go into the art as well as science. But rather, it's about professionalization of that production and giving templates and guidance for people to be able to produce towards. And so this is a way for teams to customize, but also have that baseline knowledge, that foundational layer, in order for you to be able to avoid that steep learning curve that net new analysts have. To avoid that cult of personality where the first person who stands up a brand new team tends to have a personal style, and that team adopts that style regardless of whether it fits best practices or is actually the best thing to keep your CTI team relevant. And the other thing, in particular for blueprints, is we're focusing on new teams, less mature teams, under-resourced teams. The ones that are really the ones that need to upscale their production and their capability relatively quickly and don't necessarily have the time to absorb net new members, do that mentorship, provide that support that is required to really bring in somebody who used to be a hunter or SOC analyst and get them up to speed quickly to produce high-quality results. Unlike some of the conversation about automation yesterday, this is really about the human touch and making sure that those junior analysts are getting the care and feeding they need to mature up through that scale and continue producing the quality that, frankly, a lot of CTI teams struggle to do on a recurring basis. The other big point of this is going back to that intelligence requirements conversation, and also in a key component, talking about how you produce towards your constituency. It's one thing to understand what they want. It's another thing to understand how they consume information and making sure that you're presenting that information in such a way that they can receive it and action it and make use of it. If you can't produce in that way, it doesn't matter what you're producing, how good your data is, how good of a contextualization you're able to provide. They're not going to consume it, and you might as well not produce it. And so Blueprints is really about trying to help teams get that foundational layer while providing customization and capability to support the acceptance that every team is going to be slightly different, every constituency is going to be slightly different. And so this is about raising that floor, not being prescriptive of what the panacea is. So what is our actual solution? We start out with producing some templates. And going back to the intelligence requirements piece, we built something that basically had 4 templates with generalized intel requirements. We start out with the threat actor report, which is geared towards your hunters, your SOC analysts, your incident responders, and frankly, yourselves. Having a good encyclopedia of threats and understanding what language works for describing their activity, their differentiation, is going to be the thing that you reach back to on a continuous basis to answer any other question that comes in. And so we really wanted to nail that threat actor report from a template perspective because it is probably the one that is going to be most leveraged if done properly. And this also supports those teams that don't necessarily have a fully functioning TIP or have that data repository that allows you to capture the analyst's comments and notes in a usable manner. The second template that we decided to do is an intrusion analysis report. And this is really geared towards both inform and function, supporting incident responders and hunters. This is a short form report that is focused on speed and accuracy over completeness. Because if you are an intelligence team that is supporting incident response, it does those incident responders no good if you get a request for information and you take 2 weeks to respond. This template was very much geared towards being able to push out as much data as you can about specific indicators that they're pulling off a network as quickly as possible with iteration built into it. Campaign report is more your operational report, talking to your CISO level, your manager level, talking about big changes. And then finally, the executive report, which has the least amount of technical detail, but is arguably one of the hardest things to write for especially new CTI teams that over-index on your tactical level indicators. So we start out with templates, Word documents, and the thing that I think differentiates these from some of the other ones that you might be able to pull offline is not only does it talk specifically about who you're writing for and what are their key requirements in a generic form that obviously can be modified as you get more mature on eliciting intel requirements from your key stakeholders, but it's also prescriptive about what goes into each section of these reports. So it's not only saying you need an executive summary, but here are the key points that this executive summary should have. So if you have a new analyst, if you're not comfortable writing some of these types of reports, it gives you key guidelines on how to produce this. And then we went and produced a finalized report of each of these. So not only are we telling you how you can produce a report this way, but here's what specific language around specific threats that we chose to write towards can look. And so if you have a brand new analyst, rather than pointing them towards a shared directory and saying, hey, go read these reports and then copy them, this gives you a step-by-step way in how to produce these types of reports for the specific constituencies. And because you have these step-by-step reports and templates, you can modify them so that way they fit in with your team while preserving that high-level training capability. The other piece that we tried to build into this is some of that basic tradecraft. We're not going to teach you how to do structured analytic techniques, but we are going to remind you that you need to be able to justify why you're using certain probabilistic language, why you're producing against certain intelligence requirements, so that way the best practices are slowly built in over time, and as those analysts grow and as the program expands, you're maintaining that floor that has been increased because you have these tools and you're not just tossing people into the deep end because you don't have the resources to train properly. In addition to the templates, we built a couple of tools. Primarily an authoring tool and then also a publishing tool. And the authoring tool, which is where we're going to spend most of the time during the presentation, is very much focused on reducing human error as you produce these types of reports. This is very much about giving you a standardized template to enable analysts to produce a repeatable fashion, as well as, because it is outputted as JSON, a machine-to-machine readable format to reduce human error on the back end as well. It also allows you to do some very crude metrics to start with around production against specific Intel requirements, production numbers around what level of information you're using, whether it's a lot of situational awareness reports or highly critical reports. And so by having this captured and initially outputted as JSON, it allows you to create better metrics for your intelligence production. The publishing tool then takes that JSON and converts it back to currently a Word document or a PDF. These are living projects. They're all available on GitHub. And so we're hoping the community will pick these up and build extensibility on top of them. So what does the authoring tool actually look like? Essentially a web page. But it has some key factors in here that is really around helping you build better metrics and reduce human error as analysts start inputting data. And so for all the reports, you've got some metadata that is, automatically required fields. Your report number, your criticality of the information itself. So this is where you can really start tracking what level of information are you providing your key stakeholders. Is it situational awareness? Is it a critical report on critical systems? We also have a sensitivity field. And this is particularly important if you happen to do a lot of support for incident response, or you tend to do a lot of things around company confidential information. By able to automatically tag your reports as attorney-client privilege, for example, or company confidential, it just makes the production process and the distribution process significantly easier over time. In order to aid in the way in which analysts can enter in information, we've also built in a lot of functionality in terms of being able to automatically import from CSV files if you happen to have a list of indicators. And we also have some built-in functionality to help reduce the amount of menu picking essentially that you have to do. And so here we're looking at TTPs of a particular intrusion set. And as you go through each of these fields, any place that we could put a dropdown where the amount of information was narrowable, we built it. So when you're going through tactics and techniques, all of these fields are searchable, but as you select them, it automatically whittles down your choices, so that way you're not running through the massive lists of T numbers that exist for attack, for example, each time. It also will automatically create the defend link, so that way you're not having to do that cross-reference if you're using the defend matrix as well. And we've done this with about everything that we possibly could. So not only are we doing it with TTPs and type of SHA hashes and all of that for malware, but we're also doing it for country codes. We're doing it for the different industries that might be victims that are associated with this activity, basically to reduce human error. So that way you can, over time, create a reliable set of metrics to understand what you're producing and what you're producing against. With the malware, again, if you have long lists of malware hashes, it is a CSV upload. It reduces the burden, reduces the possibility of copy and paste errors. And this whole tool is designed to help those junior analysts, to help folks that have a lot of data to upload them, especially if you're not working from a tip. Finally, going back to those intelligence requirements, there is a custom file that allows you to update your intel requirements, and it is a required field in the tool itself. So everything you produce is against a known intel requirement. And this goes back to that statistics conversation that I started with around being able to then tie your intel requirement production to the types of reports you're producing. And then you can hopefully tie that to feedback and understand whether the intel requirements are right, whether the production is adding the value that you expect it to, and what is the criticality of those reports that you are producing. And so the impact. What do we hope that you all can get from this? As I stated, it's really about reducing that production burden. It's about helping teams understand how to increase that production floor reduce the amount of training that is required, and allow new analysts to rapidly ingest into teams and start producing right away against some of those key constituencies that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's also about reducing the burden of taking those IOCs that come in avalanches and pushing them out to things that are relevant, whether that is supporting the SOC, ingesting into the firewalls, into their SIEM, whatever systems they're using, but it's also allowing you to do better metrics on your own production and start getting a finer grain understanding of exactly how you're doing against your own internal requirements and your own internal supports. And then finally, with institutional knowledge, as these templates become living documents and are hopefully adopted, it allows the community to improve them. It allows the community to build upon them and create net new templates, create new extensibility, new automation into the tool suite itself to help make this a living and breathing project, to help you all with your day-to-day challenges around how are we producing and how are we up-leveling the next generation of analysts that are coming in. So if this is whet your appetite, here's a QR code to go directly to the GitHub and start playing around with it. The authoring tool is hosted online, so you can go to it, play with it, upload what you want to. The publishing tool is one that you'd have to download off of it. And we'd love your feedback. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this project, collaboration opportunities. This is a start. This is hopefully chipping away at some of those problems that are foundational to our ability to produce reliable intelligence at scale. And so anybody who's interested in commenting, getting involved, we'd love to have those conversations. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also talk briefly about the center, because while Blueprints is the project that I am most integrated with, the Center for Threat-Informed Defense is constantly producing new projects. We're constantly looking for collaboration partners. Threat intel is obviously one of the 3 strategic pillars that we're operating under, but we're always looking for new ideas, new projects, new partnerships. So if there's anybody who wants to get involved with what we're doing, what we're pushing out, there have been a couple of the projects referenced yesterday with TEM and Attack. We'd love for further feedback and conversation around there as well. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to having this conversation.
Thank you very much, Ross. Very nice presentation. We have time for questions. Before we go to the break, any questions for Ross? Yes, please.
Thank you for amazing work you do in the center. For this project, what was the most challenging things to resolve, and what you still think that it's not good enough and you wish it was better?
I have a bit of perfectionist streak in me, so I'd say everything I wish was slightly better. But I'd say one of the biggest challenges, and I think this goes back to any time you're prototyping, is there's always more features that you want to include. And there's always more automation that you want to put in. And so I'd say the templates are a very good starting point, especially if you're an immature shop that doesn't necessarily have some of that already. The authoring tool in particular, I think there's a lot more that can be done there. There's a lot of open pasture to develop against, and there are certainly more on our backlog that we'd like to add to it in terms of what is automated, what features and integrations we can push towards. It's just a function of time and resources of whether we can put it against it. But this is where the plea to the community is. It's open sourced. It is available on GitHub today. Please take it, play with it, build on it. There's plenty more that can be done there to make it even more valuable to the broader production community.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's one.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting. So maybe two questions. One is whether you have right now a product roadmap, because I imagine things like role definitions, authentication, workflows would be quite interesting, and metrics. And whether you have right now the adequate financing to maintain this product for maybe a couple of months at least. Thank you.
We do have a backlog, wish list of things that didn't make it into the first release. It is not currently being actively worked by the center. The way the center works is we rotate through projects, and we'll be going for iteration of 2 of this hopefully in the next couple months, where we'll be able to take some of those items off of that backlog, put it out as a specific call for improvements, and then get some resources to develop against that. And so because this was released a couple months ago, it's just kind of in that down cycle while we're waiting for essentially community input and conversation about whether that additional resourcing and moving those items from the backlog to active development is worth it. So we're looking to see what the community uptake is, what commentary is, what those conversations are around the project, and then we'll figure out what the best use of those development cycles ends up being.
Okay, so maybe a quick follow-up question. You mentioned partnerships. How do those normally work? So how can organizations or entities partner with you in this project? Thank you.
Yep. So there are a couple different ways. Reach out to me directly. Happy to have those conversations. And then also the QR code here should take you to the CTI homepage and allow for more official collaboration. So the way the center works kind of at that 100,000-foot view is we work with the private sector. We are a nonprofit that is supported by the private sector. And so there are official sponsorships from the private sector where there's an official engagement from that perspective. And then there are the feedback sessions based off of presentations like this, the report releases, those types of things where it's just analyst to analyst communication. So we're happy to collaborate on kind of any level there, but also happy to talk more specifically about where people are thinking to collaborate on and what makes the most sense. I'm personally looking for analyst level feedback and conversations about, is this useful? What might make it better? What are the problems you're seeing in the field? And then obviously there is the funding side, which I thankfully can hand off to some other folks from the center.
I have a question. Thanks for the content. I've seen some of the sample reports, and they're like super long, right? And I know my boss and my boss's boss don't have that time, right, to go and read. Are there any plans to create like a different version of those, to a more compact version of this is what it is, this is why it matters, and make it simple?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. I think the threat actor report is exorbitantly long, but it was written with the intention of it being kind of that encyclopedia for your threat intelligence team, in addition to being able to lift language for shorter products. The executive report is the shortest one that is templated, and that I think you could argue is still a little long depending on who your executive is and what you're writing towards. The goal with the executive template was essentially a 3-pager, to be able to identify, your executive summary, your key points, and then give a large enough body for you to be able to make your analytic judgment however you need to. And so the assumption there is your executive summary is probably the only thing that actually goes to your C-level executive. So that should be the tightest language that you write. That should be able to hit your bottom line up front. And then the body of that report is for their aid. The next level down, somebody who has maybe 20 minutes to read something rather than 2.5 minutes. Certainly, we could release another template that is even more succinct, that is focused on that true executive level communication, with the assumption that you're getting maybe 30 seconds to a minute of read time. And that's really the way to go back to how we thought about building these, is how much time is your audience going to spend consuming information, and how do you get that information to them in the most digestible format? Obviously, your executives are going to be very different depending on your organization and their personalities, and getting to know exactly what works for them is almost a human operation in some level. and we can't produce as a one-size-fits-all for that. So the expectation is, especially with the executive report, is your executive summary is probably the only thing that would be going to that level. But we'd love to collaborate to talk about how you could do it in kind of 4-bullet format or something along those lines that is more succinct and useful if the community thinks that that would add value.
Thank you.
Any other question for Ross? Anyone? I don't know if I need to do a shameless plug for my presentation later on today, but I really like the way that you, in the structured way to create a report, the opportunity to capture metrics, just like you said. My question would be like, okay, you have a way to create a report, and it's produced in a very structured way. Where do we store all this kind of finished intelligence that the CTI team creates? Do you have any plans in the roadmap, or is it in your scope? What would be the knowledge management tool?
So we did not focus on the knowledge management portion of it. The assumption is, I think from a scoping perspective, is knowledge management is unique to every organization, and so building a foundational piece there gets complicated and fraught with personalized opinions of whether you're doing it right or wrong. The way we tried to sidestep that, at least to start with, is by allowing the authoring tool to output as a JSON, which allows it to be grabbed by any number of additional tools. It is API compatible right out of the box. So if you have a knowledge management system already, it's relatively easy to grab that, import it, and do what you want with it. If you don't have that system in place, we'd certainly love to have the conversation around how you can do best practices, implement it, build appropriate data stores for this type of information, capture some of the metadata that's built into the JSON that we're outputting, so that way you can do advanced metrics on it. But it was outside of the scope of the initial project.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there a way to customize the reports to add our own organization's branding, or do I have to keep the MITRE logo there?
Everything is customizable. So it is, the authoring tool is code up on GitHub. You can customize every field, every drop-down menu to your heart's content. The publishing tool is the exact same way. And the fancy finish reports that we have up as an example is one way in which you can create it. And those are Word document templates, so you can rip out the MITRE logo, the coloring, change it fairly easily if you want to go that route as well. I will admit that because of production cycles, the publishing tool, the Word documents are significantly plainer than the example reports that we have up there. But yes, it is all customizable. There's no expectation that you're going to keep the MITRE Ingenuity logo as you produce these things.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Okay. Last opportunity for one more question before we go for break. If not, yeah, I'm seeing okay. So if not, let's give another round of applause for Ross.
Thank you.